Hey everyone, I'm Jenny. I'm Managing Director at Techstars here in New York. For anyone who doesn't know, Techstars is a worldwide network to help entrepreneurs succeed. And we run accelerators around the world. I think we're running about 46 of them now. But we run a great one here in New York that will run this summer. We've been around here for almost 8-9 years. So excited to kick off with these amazing panelists, some who've gone through Techstars programs as well. But I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the topic. So, Sakina?
Hi, I'm Sakina Groth, and I'm the Director of Product Management at Magic Leap.
Hi, I'm Neha Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of Obsess. We are an experiential e-commerce platform. We use VR AR to make online shopping much more immersive, interesting, and branded.
Perfect. I'm Nate Beatty, the CTO and co-founder of Iris VR. We build immersive computing tools for collaboration and coordination in construction, engineering, and architecture.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Podwal. I work at Google on the AR VR team, and I lead the team here in New York.
Hi everyone, my name is Advani, and I'm the co-founder of Viro, and we build developer tools to make it easier for people to make AR and VR apps.
Awesome. Well, welcome, guys. Thank you so much. And it's such a diverse panel of startups, later stage startups, corporates. So while we were backstage, I said, like, let's give a little ground rules or a roadmap of really like what's out there. And it sounded like no one really agreed. So I think that's a great place to start. What are the categories, right? So this panel, it says AR, VR, right? But what about mixed reality and some of the other categories? So just quickly, anyone want to talk about what are the different buckets?
I'll take a stab.
Nice.
And everyone, I'm sure, will disagree, and that'll be great. So in my mind, and this often comes up in conversations with my team as well, we try to divide things into 3 big buckets. One is VR headsets or wearables. The second is AR headsets or wearables. And the third is smartphone-based AR. And for sure, there are many subcategories within each of these. So for example, in VR, you have smartphone-based VR systems, you have standalone self-contained systems like the Oculus Quest that's coming out next year. You have PC-based tethered VR systems, all of which have a range of capabilities and limitations. And same goes for the other categories that I mentioned, but for me, it comes down to those 3.
Mm-hmm. I'll add one more to that. So you said smartphone-based AR, but I think smartphone-based VR is also another category. So 360 VR, especially on the web. So for us, our journey was we started on the headset side, and now we've moved completely to smartphone because we're doing consumer stuff to smartphone-based VR and AR, which is accessible on the web, the most kind of easiest thing right now without even downloading an app.
So when people talk about mixed reality or extended reality, what's that? Where does that fit into the buckets that you guys just laid out?
I think Microsoft uses the term mixed reality to refer to their entire ecosystem of immersive computing platforms, right? So immersive computing is sort of like my favorite way to talk about this entire ecosystem, in that you can see things in true to scale 3D, whether they're digital objects that exist in your physical space, right? And you can see the physical world and the digital world at the same time. That's more like an AR kind of thing, or immersive VR, where everything you're seeing is digital, right? On a headset. And I think one of the challenges that we have, right, as sort of product people in general, is communicating to our audience who maybe doesn't really care, right, whether it's VR or mixed reality or AR or smartphone-based or headset-based or untethered headset-based. Like, they just want to get into an experience and have an interesting, engaging, valuable experience in this new digital realm, right? So we need to educate and communicate to our customers what the actual experience is, rather than getting lost in the terms, right? So educate ourselves about what the terms are, but then provide just a good experience for the end user.
Well, that's interesting, though. Do you need to educate the audience, though? I mean, educate ourselves? How much do they need to know about these categories so that they're able to access the products and content that they want? I mean, it's an interesting question.
It certainly is.
So let's take a step back. Where are we now? Before we talk about kind of what's coming up, where are we now in the AR, VR, MR world? Like what actually is the state? If we could just quickly kind of, a few people talk about where things are today.
I mean, so I can go, right, with Magic Leap, And we're talking about all these terms. We, I think, to avoid confusion, almost invented a new term, which is spatial computing. And
So add that one to your list now. New bucket.
And what that basically means is this is a product that has cameras that can see what you see. It can see your surrounding environment, map it, and then use that information to give you digital information. So it knows where this floor is. It knows what your room looks like. If you're shopping, maybe it can pull out furniture and actually place it in your room and do really interesting things for you. That technology is really new. So I think we really are, our product right now is a creator edition. So it's sort of an MVP of tools for developers to be able to access and do really interesting things with. But it's really just the beginning. And I think we're figuring out where the value is and what are the things you can really do, what are the most compelling things you can do alongside our developers right now.
So Obsess has the product in market. So maybe you can talk about what you think is kind of here versus what's coming.
Yeah, so I think in terms of hardware, from a consumer standpoint, we're still not there with headsets, right? Like, obviously, there are a lot of products in market, but not at mass adoption scale yet. But for B2B, it's different, and obviously, there's other people who can talk about that. But I think form factor, obviously, there's a lot of hardware limitations, but form factor is going to be a big part of when it gets to mass adoption. And I actually think that it's not just, the form factor is not just about making it smaller, but just making it cool. Because, obviously there's companies that, release anything and it's considered cool. And then, so they will release something in this space in 2020, 2021, whenever. And then I think every other company can, like Gucci has been making these sunglasses for the last year. There are these massive sunglasses, and they're the coolest thing ever. So if you could just make it cool, I think it could gain mass adoption. But I think
talk a little bit more how people are using your product, right? Because they're using it
now. So now I think what's here now, which was your question, is you have your mobile devices, and that's what you have. And so that's definitely here now, both smartphone-based VR, AR, both in terms of the web and apps. And each of us already use it. 70 million people use Snapchat filters every day. That's AR. Facebook has AR. Instagram has AR. So this is stuff you're already using in your daily life without, as you said, necessarily even calling it labels like AR and VR. So I think that's where really the usage is going to grow.
How about you, Neha?
I think, like, the cool factor in the enterprise is, people use operating systems that aren't very cool too, right? Like, a lot of people are non-Mac users, and they get a lot of value out of it. So for the enterprise, it's really about making sure that we deliver a lot of value, enough value to that our users will overcome the friction required in setting up the device itself. So for us, it is about form factor, but it's about form factor related to like ease of use and friction to go from 0 to having your first VR experience. So that's one of our KPIs, right, at Iris is making sure that we can reduce that time and that setup friction and sort of ease of use as much as possible, or increase ease of use as much as possible, right? So that's why we're really excited about anytime we can reduce the number of cables that you have to plug in, or even make a device entirely self-contained, that will drive adoption quite significantly. So right now, we are seeing quite a bit of adoption, but it's sort of an early adopter going into the early majority market. And as long as there's somebody that's relatively technical and able to update the drivers and actually make sure everything is set up well, then the entire firm, right, can then go ahead and use the product successfully. So we're looking forward to seeing that change in the very near future.
I agree with everything said. I'll add on just one last point. I think to answer where we are now, for me, it's very use case specific. And if you look at smartphone-based AR, there are some use cases, as Neha said, that are daily habits. Hundreds of millions of people are using AR for self-expression. And many millions of people are using AR for retail. AR ads are a massive business for Snapchat already. So there's a lot of things with product market fit. And in VR, there's also several things that already have reached that point, even with all the friction. Enterprise use cases, education, creativity apps. So I think it's hard to say in a single sentence where AR, VR is, partly because there are so many categories of AR, VR, but also because the use cases are at varying levels of adoption.
I agree with what Mike said, especially with regard to the front-facing camera, which has been huge for self-expression. One thing I might add is we're also seeing a rapid increase in the amount of developers who can build AR and VR, because these technologies were previously very hard to access and understand. You had to know how to do 3D rendering really well, or you had to know how to do machine learning and deep learning to do computer vision very well. Now we're seeing more and more platforms that make this stuff accessible so that everyday companies can build AR and VR experiences, not just heavy tech companies. And I think that's going to help accelerate the amount of use cases out there, especially in mobile AR, since that's ready to go now.
So now taking a step of what's coming and how we're going to get there, let's start with hardware. We talked a little bit about some of the friction, but someone want to jump in? Actually, maybe you Magic Leap and tell us what's coming on the device side.
So I mean, there's lots of things we can do to harden the hardware, but I actually think most of the work is on the software side. We have to meet developers where they are and make it really easy for them to develop this content. And I think the other thing that's really going to help proliferate across categories is standards. We need standards so that if you learn how to do something once for a Magic Leap device, or for an Oculus Rift, it's going to work cross-platform. And we're starting to see that emerge, definitely with the mobile AR side, but there are a lot of new working groups with web. That's another thing. Web is obviously a very open, and we're seeing these companies go a lot more into that space. But I think in general, there's a lot more activity in the standard space, and once that happens, it starts making the entire category move a lot faster. So again, there's a lot that can happen on the hardware side, and I think a lot of it is related to form factor, as we talked about, and just the social acceptability of wearing that, making it smaller. And what's hard?
So when am I going to walk down the street with one, strapped on and feel good about it?
I think when the value is there on the software and the content side, people will get more over that, and at the same time. But I think what is tough for us is right now our use cases are competing with the tablet, with the phone, with the laptop, which when those things first came out, none of those had very great form factors, right? The first PC or the first cell phone was a brick, but they weren't competing with other digital devices, and we are. So, that is something that makes it tougher, but as soon as I think the content is there that has value, it overcomes the form factor, and at the same time, we see it happening, I think, across the VR and AR categories, the form factor is improving.
Well, what I'm looking forward to on the hardware side is just more and more powerful GPUs. So what we're doing on mobile devices right now, we are already pushing the GPU to the limit with real-time graphics rendering. As that gets better and better, we'll be able to produce even more photorealistic experiences and more immersive experiences at a faster speed, faster load time. And I think that's really going to drive adoption, because imagine on your phone, even loading video right now is slow. So with AR, VR, we are loading 3D assets, we're loading streaming, animations, all of these things that are even more heavier assets. So both in terms of 5G networks on the network side, and then in terms of hardware, GPUs is really going to, I think, accelerate adoption as well.
Cool. I'd love to talk a little bit more about distribution and how you guys think about B2B versus B2C, what we're seeing adopted and where we see it going. So maybe Mike, you want to kick off?
Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of traction on both sides. B2B, there's been a number of big stories just in the last year. Walmart bought tens of thousands of headsets, I think, for corporate training purposes. And the software is also starting to support that as well. And on the B2C side, I think we're coming back to this theme of friction. And I think distribution for things like smartphone-based AR is pretty straightforward. Everyone has a phone in their pocket already. Many of the apps they already know and love just have AR added to them. So distribution is really simple. And I think there are also brand new AR first apps that are just really easy to download too. The other aspect of distribution is, selling hardware, of course, and I think that's a different challenge for different kinds of companies. So there are startups that are pretty early on. There's a company a product called North that's about to come out. It's a very lightweight pair of AR glasses that does a number of really powerful consumer experiences, and they just built their own store in Brooklyn to have a kind of a show and tell retail experience. And then you have companies like Apple, which may at some point engage in this market too, and they obviously have stores all over the world. So people are coming at it from different angles.
Regarding distribution, I do think there's one area where we're really held back, and that's the lack of solid web AR. Suppose I walk into a drugstore and I want navigation to find where that contact lens cleaner is that I can never find. I don't know what app to download to bring up that AR experience. And a lot of AR experiences are going to be bite-sized, and those bite-sized experiences are best served through the web, and that's not here yet. And it's unclear when that will be here, or if it will be here, since Apple controls so much of that, so much power in that regard, over whether to expose that through their web browser.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction actually right now. There's sort of two kinds of experiences that are emerging in both AR and VR, right? And it's like that kind of bite-sized, okay, I want to navigate through the drugstore, or I want to, go through one of those portals that we all see on, all the, GIFs on social media, right? Where somebody goes into another world in the middle of Times Square or whatever. Those are these one-off kind of don't have a whole lot of replayability kinds of experiences. And then you have other experiences that are either applications for the enterprise or a consumer market that are either tools or replayable games, right? I think that's just, doesn't really answer your question, but that's an important distinction as we're talking about this whole ecosystem.
Well, Nate and Neha, you guys are, B2B to C, so you kind of have to play with both parties. Maybe you could just talk a little bit more about how you've seen adoption from both those parties, because you have to deal with them.
So for us, interesting on the headset versus smartphone side, when we started off with headsets, we did more deployments in retail stores. So we last year, for example, released the first ever headset-based shopping experience deployed in retail in partnership with Google. And so because at a mass level, people don't have these devices at home yet, it's really about like a place you can go to where you can get that device, which is usually events, retail stores, etc. And the use case for retail is very interesting. I mean, there's so many and there's so many examples, but it's about when they don't have all the inventory in the store, being able to see things more realistically. And then kind of on the consumer side directly, now we are doing more e-commerce because we are not limited by people not having headsets at home. As I mentioned, we are doing web VR. So essentially, for example, last week we launched like 2 immersive shopping experiences for 2 brands that don't have real stores in real life. But when you go to their website, you will see this amazing shopping experience that's all powered using VR and AR technologies just on your phone. I think I can talk a lot more about a lot of use cases, but this year, like a bunch of brands, including Macy's, we have worked with Farfetch, Levi's, other brands, Gucci, Zara, Starbucks, like all of them have released AR, VR experiences in some form.
How about you, Nate? But specifically, like you're dealing with businesses who ultimately, have customers. So how do you get both on board?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of our challenge has been we don't have an application that is. Well, we do. We have a panel viewing application that just exists on a smartphone, but it's a smartphone that you put into a Google Cardboard or any sort of smartphone-based headset experience, right? So we're really focused on an application, and we have this theory, right? That and we're proving it out. So it's kind of no longer a theory that true-to-scale VR really is kind of what our application is all about, right? You can convey instant understanding in an immersive 3D context that you just can't get on a 2D screen. So we're shying away from sort of the AR kind of phone-based applications. So for us, distribution of hardware is really critical, and we have a really good customer experience team, right? So that's how we do it. We have to educate our customers about what they need to get set up either in a conference room or with hardware, a laptop and an Oculus Rift, or whatever hardware they need to be able to take that on the road and make presentations with their clients. So ultimately, our customers are the ones that own the hardware and control the hardware and then give experiences to either their clients or collaborators and colleagues that they're working with. What I'm looking forward to, and I mentioned this before, are these standalone mobile headsets like the Oculus Quest, things that don't require a PC to use. And we're working on ways to actually distribute those en masse. I mean, the price point is low enough that we can, distribute those into the kind of the firms that are going to use them, and then they can distribute those to their clients in a much easier way. Like pack it all up, put it in a box, and send it along, rather than piecing together all these different hardware components, the PC and the sensors, and the headsets, and everything.
Great. I know we wanted to talk about some actual use cases, and so when we were talking before, you were talking about extended VR and how some of those use cases potentially are different to AR, VR. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when we think about how we're differentiated from VR, I think there are things that VR right now is definitely better for, right? If you want something fully immersive, especially when we think about something like games or even training, like enterprise training right now, it's very easy to create a 360 video, have that content, and it's quick to make versus sort of having to CGI something. So there are definitely things today that VR are better for. With AR, it's valuable, I think, with two things, and with sort of spatial computing in general. One is when you still want or need to be part of that environment. So say you're in a meeting and I still want to be able to talk to you and see your expressions, even if you do have a big device on your face, but still, we're sort of co-present. And the other is you want to be able to use something, but again, you don't want to be taken completely out of your environment. Maybe you're still watching your toddler or you're cooking, and so you're not completely blinded by what's around you. That's really interesting when you can just sort of bring up content and place it in your environment or sort of have displays around. The other is when the benefit actually uses the context of your environment, and that's actually part of the experience. So when we think about enterprise, it's maybe you're aerospace training and you need to actually be able to like feel the controls, and it might illuminate them and walk you through the experience, but you actually need that equipment there, or you need the actual location there. And, it's showing you where, if you're a Walmart employee, you would have produce displays. Mm-hmm. And so those types of things, again, those actually require that environment and not for you to be removed out of it. So that's where I think the use cases for augmented reality or spatial computing especially are different. And I think one of the interesting things are right now I see them both having their own benefits, and I wonder if they're going to converge into sort of a single product over the next few years.
Right. One of the terms that I learned from your organization is contextual computing, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like this concept of being able to walk through an environment and see the information that you want to see about the things that are in your environment in real time. And I love that, because when we think about AR and sort of the future of AR for our organization, instead of seeing, let's say, just like a little model in front of you and doing, 3D visualization with our tool, we want to actually provide people on a job site with the information that they need when they need it in a true to scale way. And that's powerful too, because if that's presented to you just like, through your stereo vision with a device on your head, then you have your hands free. Right? And like, what a concept. You can do real work and get digital information at the same time. So that's a really exciting future for us when it comes to AR versus VR, where you're just sort of like consuming content. And sure, you can use it as a creation tool, but it's just a very different experience where it's all self-contained in a digital environment.
You'll never use that while you're driving.
No. Or on a construction site with a jackhammer.
Or watching your kid.
Right.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so some other use cases and maybe some metrics, because we are product people, we love metrics. So the Macy's example that I just mentioned, so Macy's is rolling out VR headsets to 70 of their stores this holiday after doing a pilot test, which was for furniture, where people can basically go to the store and design their own room in a VR headset in the store. And they saw a 60% increase in sales for the stores in this category where they did the pilot test. Another example is House with their smartphone AR app, which basically lets you, see furniture in your room before you purchase it. They saw that people were 11 times more likely to purchase stuff if they saw it in that way, and were spending 2.7 more time in the app. And then for us as well, we have seen increases in conversion rate and time spent, in average order value of how much people are ordering if they are getting these more immersive experiences.
That's a great lead in to my next question, which is we have a lot of product people here that are building for their own companies, for other people's companies. When do they start integrating this into existing products? So you've mentioned some of the benefits, but anyone else have some thoughts on when and how?
I think now is a good time to start at least looking at it, because
get on it, people.
There's one thing you can do is you don't need to build an AR app from the ground up. It just needs to be a feature you bolt onto your existing app, and it could be, just think in terms of what can you build to either increase people's self-expression or to identify more of what's going on in the world around them. You see a lot of this with even 10, 15 years ago, Yelp added their monocle thing to their app, and that was just the sort of OG AR that, I don't know if people used it, but it at least had a big marketing presence. And you can build from that. And it's good to get teams familiar with that whole environment, because one thing I think we could all agree on is that this stuff will be big. The question of, do you invest in it now? I would say if you have a good use case in your specific niche, and like we always talk about like the big use cases, like, you know, seeing what furniture looks like, or like changing the carpeting on your floor, things like that appeal to everyone. But I think what's more important for AR now is what's important for your specific industry. Like the stuff that's happening in the medical field, being able to differentiate different types of cells, cancerous or moles, is really fascinating. That's AR. There's a lot of education use cases that are AR. There's storytelling apps that are appearing for children. So think about your specific niche and what you can do there, and go from there. And I think you'll be surprised at how much easier to use these things are now.
Yeah. I would say, too, think about like what's more valuable in a 3D setting, right? In a 3D context. So we engage with screens so much, but you know, what do you actually want to see in your environment? And that's, I mean, for us, that's what we're thinking about when it comes to the construction site. Like, what do I actually want to see in my environment versus what's easier to see on a tablet and what's more easily consumable, like on a piece of paper, right? Because our industry is very much a pencil and paper kind of industry. So that's really, really helpful for us.
And any practical tips for these folks in terms of the differences? You know, they're used to integrating with mobile and web and this, so just like from a product perspective, you know, what's the heavy lift going to look like? Briefly, you mentioned the web, and I think that's really important, especially when we're talking about now. I think the web is a really great entry point right now. So if you have a regular 2D website, you don't have to build anything from scratch if you want to create sort of a web VR enabled or an AR enabled website, especially if you already have CAD models at your company. Literally all you have to do is change out those images, and it would recognize if you're on an AR and VR device, and it would allow those users to have a richer experience. So again, that barrier to entry and the investment required is really low, and it'll give you a chance to immediately be on this platform. I think the standards will come fastest on the web too, but I think they're going to come across the board. So that's something that requires very little effort, and will allow you to see how users are using this and allow you to scale really quickly as these devices start growing.
The barriers are definitely like, the barriers to create content are coming down. Like Neha said, the value actually is, like, it is there, it exists today, just from the numbers that you mentioned, right? So I think a lot of, you know, there was this huge wave of hype over the past couple of years, and that kind of died down. And I think maybe we're coming out of the trough right now, where, you know, in terms of the hype cycle, where we're really seeing value and customers engaging with augmented reality experience in a bite-sized way and VR experiences in a meaningful way that drive value and, you know, kind of drive their KPIs for their businesses. So I think. So
how are you measuring that? Like, if I want to use this for marketing,
sure.
What are the measurements, and like, how do I make sure I'm getting my money's worth?
I think a couple of key metrics in marketing in general are brand lift, if you're doing a brand campaign, or performance and conversion. And I think to date, we've seen a lot of evidence that brand lift is like very, very powerful, or brand lift is very, very achievable with AR ads and AR marketing campaigns. Performance,
Any examples come to mind?
Yeah, like anything in Snapchat where you turn your face into a cheeseburger or a taco. Like, these are massive, massive campaigns that have a ton of mind share, and the numbers are there to be proven as well. Performance, I think, is a little bit earlier. There's a lot of experimentation we're seeing. Amazon has a AR place a couch into your room feature in their camera, and they haven't announced any numbers about whether that actually drives more conversions, but based on what you've seen, I'm guessing they probably have. But on the advertising side, I don't think we've seen any case studies yet about performance increasing in general.
Turning now to content, right? So this is a huge part of the ecosystem. Maybe we could start with you, Raj. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of the content environment and how you see that at Viro and, you know, down the road?
Yeah, content in AR and VR has been a challenge, because moving to 3D space is quite a lift for people. Like, when you want to in the web, you could always just grab 2D images and text and throw it all together. In 3D, you've got to have a 3D modeler, and you have to, you know, build 3D assets and compress them and store them. It's like quite a process. But we're seeing that change now, in that increasingly you're seeing the ability to scan 3D objects so you can bring the real world into your digital apps more easily that way. You're starting to see more and more ways to get 3D video, immersive video in VR. So this is slowly changing, but that is something that has, a lot of our apps focus on just basic photosphere type VR, because that was the easiest to get content for, but we're starting to see more and more apps move toward like true 3D assets so you can interact with your environment.
And what about, like, how does it compare to, the gaming environment or some of these other environments around content?
They're often very similar. I think the line between a game, at least in VR, the line between a game and a useful experience, I think, is blurring. And in many cases, when you see some of the most polished, like enterprise VR apps out there, they're often built by teams that used to work on games. And the expertise in building a 3D environment, understanding the interactions, the number of like more technical aspects of how a 3D model is either polished or not, are very game-like. So I think that line will continue to blur over time.
How about at Magic Leap? How do you guys think about the content and how that integrates with your product features as you're developing them?
Sure. I mean, content for any new platform, it's always a chicken or an egg situation, right? Because even if developers are very capable, and even if they know they can deliver a better experience on here, it's where's the money, right? Either where's the money for your company, or if you're an indie dev, you need to eat. So for mobile devs, of course, it's really hard to compare just the amount of users and the reach right now. And then the other folks that are obviously best suited to create 3D content are game developers. Even if it's not gaming content, they're the ones that really have experience with 3D. And it's just right now, how do I monetize this? So that's the tough part. That's where I think, again, the more we can do as a platform to make it easy for them to develop and meet them where they are matters. And then the other really big part, since it is a chicken or egg based on how many users are out there, is cost, right? That's the thing we haven't talked about. And especially if you are standalone, like having all of these features, being a powerful computer, and then also, having world vision and all these cameras, like that's not cheap. And that's also a chicken or the egg, because those costs, of course, are also based on distribution. So again, now as a lot of both the hardware components and the software components are becoming standardized, those costs are going to come down for companies and allow them to lower the price. And so it's sort of just a economics 101 thing. And when that price goes down and they become more self-contained and people get it, then the users are going to rise. And so I think these things are going to happen very quickly. But it's different than a phone, because everyone had to buy a phone anyway. And so they're like, why not buy this phone? And so that's why, for iPhone, it was really easy all of a sudden to have millions of customers and for them to create apps. And for us, like I said, we're competing with those devices. And it's taking a little bit longer. But again, I think a lot of it has to do with cost, and we know that it is a long game. But we've got some really compelling content that will be coming out this year.
That's awesome.
I think content is a limiting factor even for us and in the retail e-commerce side, because of like needing 3D models of products, which is again like very expensive and time consuming. So anyone who's in the space of like 3D scanning and making it cheap and making it really like photorealistic, we are not doing that, but whoever is doing that I think that's a huge opportunity. But in the meantime, there are various ways to sort of work around it and get around it and still create like amazing experiences. So it's, I think you can, even though the content is limited, there's, you can still create amazing experiences. And of course, if you have the budget and the cost is not a factor, then you can make it completely immersive.
Awesome. So we just have a few more minutes. I'd love to talk about the demographic. Who is actually using AR and VR now? And what's the timeline for broader adoption? But who are these people? So just paint the picture a little bit. I'd love to hear, Mike, what you're seeing.
Yeah, sure. Again, I think this probably depends a little bit based on what category of AR, VR we're talking about. Absolutely. But for VR headsets, largely I think we're talking about people who also buy gaming consoles. So it skews younger, probably skews more male in general. If you're talking about smartphone-based AR experiences, it's kind of everybody. Like anyone who has Instagram, which I'm guessing is everybody at this point. And one who has Amazon as well. So I think it depends a little bit on the category, at least on the consumer side, and then for enterprise, demographics are you're probably more suited to answer that.
Sure, I think it's And as I said before, it's sort of that early adopter to early majority market right now, and typically we're selling to a lot of people who are gamers or who have dabbled in games, and those are our champions at the firms that we're selling to. So that's sort of how we work our way into a firm. Somebody will seek out VR because they've heard about it and they've heard it's interesting, adopt it, buy a headset themselves, and then expose the rest of the firm to it. And once we cross that barrier, then really it's anybody who finds value in the application itself in their day-to-day work, right? So it could be the partnership at the firm who wants to understand the progress on the design of some building. It could be a construction project manager who wants to validate the model in the field. A number of different people, and then the demographics could be really anyone. But to actually kind of get that first initial foothold, it's a lot of the same market that you're describing from a consumer perspective, right? It's a probably early 30s, tech forward, tech savvy kind of individual.
That's right.
All right, so let's talk about industries that are being transformed right now, and we think the ones that are going to be transformed. So what are some of the opportunities, do you think, that are coming up? We've talked a lot about what's here, what's now, and what's some of the friction, but what's in front of us?
To me, there are two. I think the most immediate and obvious one is retail. So we all know, we don't have to tell you about the retail apocalypse, and half of our malls are going to be gone in 5 years, and very sad, Toys R Us is gone. But the smart retailers are really looking for new ways to improve their experiences, and that's both in store. How do they engage people more in store? And I think there's a lot they can do with AR, VR, actually alongside the physical experience. But then also, if everything is going online, one of the hardest things is that now you can't see a lot of things in store because they're carrying limited inventories, or the stores literally aren't there anymore. But if you buy it online, it's really hard to tell what something necessarily looks like. And being able to see that actually in your environment or in 3D gives you a lot more information. So it's going to, I think the obvious answer there is for retail. And of course with retail, a lot of times they already have the CAD models as well. The other one that I really see, which is a little bit further out, is definitely personal productivity. And it's not about any one single thing that you would put on a headset just for your calendar or just for your email, but it is about that, and you combine that with AI when you wake up, and it's just got everything already laid out for you. It has your email, it has the news sites you check, it's everything set up, and you may have a different setup for your Tuesday morning and your Sunday night in the same room. And so it really then becomes larger than the sum of its parts. And again, a lot of that is dependent on content, but I think that's definitely where it's going, is it's going to allow you to do things that are very single modal right now and become multimodal really quickly.
Obviously retail, you agree with that?
On one point about most of retail having CAD models, unfortunately not so true in the fashion industry, which is our main focus. Only 4% of the industry today uses 3D in this manufacturing process, so huge way to go there. So aside from retail, I think one of the big opportunities, and this is not specific to a category, is whoever is the one who is going to control what we see in our AR environment once these glasses or become sort of a permanent part of our lives, I think is going to be the winner take all in this situation. Because if you think about when the web first came about and Google became the place where whoever was creating content, you were accessing it through Google. So the same thing is going to happen with AR as content gets easier to create, is with any given object or with any given point, there can be infinite amounts of content associated with it. So who's going to decide which of those we see as we're walking down the street? Is it just going to be the same OS companies, or is it going to be the hardware companies, or is it going to be somebody new? So I think that's a big white space opportunity.
Areas of opportunity?
I'll offer two more. Were you going to say something?
Go for it. I'll go after you.
So one I think is generally creativity or content creation. We already have some tools right now in VR and AR that allow for that. But if you think about what people do when they make 3D content, like designing a Pixar film, they're essentially designing, today for the most part, 3D experiences using 2D tools. And the idea of using inherently 3D tools to make that 3D content just feels incredibly natural. So that will continue to evolve and I'm sure become a bigger deal. And the second one is education. This is already has a little bit of a foothold in VR, but one of the inherent parts of education is feeling like you're there to understand an aspect of history, an aspect of science, and on many other fields. And I think the immersion quality of VR and the aspect of AR that can bring anything to you, I think will also continue to enhance education.
Anyone excited about health and wellness? I feel like.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, healthcare from an enterprise perspective, I think is really important, right? When I think
guess
about,
Raj mentioned enterprise.
Yeah, oh yeah, health I'm very excited about, and medicine in general, and things that help professionals do their jobs better, where it's okay for them to wear like a big headset without looking weird, it's fine. You can do that. So it could help, not only, it could help skilled professionals, for example, doctors, it could also help unskilled professionals with their jobs by showing them, how to do the job, training, and then like show them if they're doing the job wrong or right. And another area I'll throw in is navigation, which could come earlier than later because you can fix that into the dashboard of your car. And so that can do a lot to show you about the area in which you're driving, where to go, and what's around you.
Awesome. So I'm supposed to open this up to some questions. Anyone have a question? Just stand up and I can repeat it. So.
Hi. So this was an awesome talk, so thank you. So my question is, for a lot of the AR features, there are platform dependencies on AR core and AR kit, so you can have like all the 3D models in the world, but if wall detection isn't great, you're going to have to go do that. So what is the role of like AR kit and AR core specifically for mobile AR, and what is the product strategy there? Where is it?
I guess I'm on the hook for this one.
get back to work, Mike.
Repeat the question so we can.
Yes, just to repeat the question. The question was around for smartphone AR-based experiences, application developers have a strong dependency on platform tools like ARKit on iOS and AR Core on Android. What are the capabilities there, and where are things going? In general, I think two big trends that I would expect in AR Core and ARKit. One is for quality to improve over time. You mentioned that maybe vertical plane detection isn't everything that you wish that it was. It'll always get better. All these companies are investing in it. And the second big trend is adding more fundamental features to these buckets of AR Core and ARKit. And you're already seeing a little bit of this in ARKit, which started out as, hey, I just want to place a 3D thing onto a floor. That's it. And over time, they've added features like object recognition. So I can detect that that's a person, that that's the face on the person, that that's a cat. And that unlocks a whole other range of experiences. So I would consider these mini platforms on top of the operating system platforms.
Another question over there.
Two things. So the game engines become stronger and stronger. Unity now has emulated IMAX cameras, so you can build, you can shoot VR movies in emulated spaces with emulated cameras. My question will be first, what does that specific example maybe have an effect? Also, how will game engines in general play a role, especially in regards to VR? Will these be the only tools? Will we see new tools coming out? And the second thing, Oculus Quest, your opinion, how much of an impact will the launch platform have?
I could take the first question about game engines, because my company writes what we call an application engine to compete with Unity, in the sense that we want to build a platform that makes it easier for people to build non-gaming experiences, because they are very different. So for example, with an application engine, you're more about moving people through different states and sequences of the same way an iPhone app works, like UIKit, whereas a game engine, you have all these other aspects that you don't necessarily need, like artificial intelligence and physics and things like that. So it's harder for a web and mobile developer to jump into that. So I think the game engines will remain very powerful, but you'll see more platforms arriving that are easier to use for web and mobile developers.
All right, one more question. Saw some hand there. Yeah.
Do you see any user cases for the AR, VR, for the people with disabilities? People who cannot hear, cannot see.
Oh, I do.
Repeat the question.
So I think the question was, do we see this category, AR and VR, helping people with disabilities? I think one of the things that is being reinvented because of XR is interaction models, which in the past, of course, it definitely required your hands, it required a mouse or a keyboard or being able to touch the screen. And with AR, I think with both VR and AR, we're looking a lot at gestures, at using natural voice, and I think in particular, I know with us, it's also using eye tracking. So especially if you think about someone that's had a stroke or that's paralyzed, to be able to use your eyes to communicate with computing, or your natural voice, there are going to be a lot more, multimodal and natural ways to interact with computing. So yes, I do see it really changing things for people with disabilities.
We've already seen design of accessibility design of spaces, right, impacted by virtual reality as well. So to be able to explore a space from the perspective of a child or somebody in a wheelchair or any different sort of height and size perspective, that's actually really helpful during the design process, right? And it's much more intuitive, and so you get that instant understanding rather than trying to design a space that's accessible in any way by looking at a 2D plan.
So I think we're out of time, and I'm getting the better wrap up. But you guys were awesome. We covered a lot of ground here, and thank you so much. So